Now, it's been almost a year since the deadly Boksburg explosion. A tanker became stuck under a bridge near the Tambo Memorial Hospital and exploded, killing 41 people. In the weeks that followed, there was an arrest and a court appearance, but there haven't been any convictions. Let's find out. I'm joined by forensic expert and legal consultant Stan Bezuidenhout. Stan, thank you so much for your time. Now, this tragic incident led to the conversations about the safety of carrying hazardous material on dangerous roads in the country, etc. Has anything changed in this industry with regards to that conversation?
Masego, firstly, hi, and hello to your listeners and your viewers. So, yes, there have been some changes. During 2023, I've actually spoken at several conferences, including the Road Freight Association conference, and specifically an event with the LP Gas Association, with other countries even getting engaged in it. As far as the LP Gas Association is concerned, or that industry is concerned, there was a huge push towards improvements. Most people approached me to be able to learn from the incident, to ask me for guidance on how they can change and improve methods, processes, procedures and protocols to make the roads and specifically the product transport more, safer. But I must admit, I haven't seen much of a shift from the rest of the transport industry. During the years leading up to this horrible tragedy, I was quite engaged by the commercial sector, and it was kind of common cause for there to be protocols in place where any serious or major collision is immediately investigated by somebody like me. I have found that there has been a decline in this, and I see a lot of serious events happening, and there's very little feedback and follow-up on that. So while there's been a trend in that particular industry towards improving safety and reducing risk, I found that the rest of the transport industry has seemingly been putting back. Perhaps it's the spin-off of the COVID impact, costing and implications with regards to that. But I can't say that the whole industry has taken the shift for the positive yet.
And we did see, for instance, the truck driver. I remember his explanation, or the explanation from the company that hired him. They even had video footage taken from the road of him asking people, especially the onlookers, to step away. He was able to, go far enough not to get any injuries or die. So it looks like some companies do train their drivers, at least, on what to do in these scenarios. Or is that not enough?
So firstly, yes, I'm not aware of any operator that transports dangerous or hazardous goods such as chemicals, LP gas products, or even fuel and chemicals that would use drivers that do not receive training. There are three elements to that training. The first is the training on how to operate the vehicle in the environment in which they transport. The second is what to do in the event of an incident. And the third is the training, specifically the so-called professional driving permit and the aspects relevant to the transport of dangerous goods. But I must add that the kinds of training that these people are given, let's call them professional bulk operators, the kind of training they are given is also impacted by the environment in which they work. For instance, a driver might attempt to take control of, say, members of the public, but is not really legally protected if they don't comply, don't listen, or don't adhere. So the best a driver can do in those situations is to try, but even with his training, he can't control and he cannot exercise any actual power over bystanders, unfortunately.
All right. So when it comes to the public, unfortunately, it was this type of incident where 41 people died so brutally that taught us this lesson, right?
Absolutely. So when it comes to the public, I mean, it's hardly the right probably moment to mention this, but I've just traveled several times to Cape Town and back, and I found that unfortunately, we still have a terrible road use culture. I mean, I've watched people overtake as many as 4, 5, or 6 vehicles separated by hundreds of meters, completely drive on the wrong side of the road for several minutes at a time. I've seen trucks driving abreast, holding up as much as 100 or more vehicles, while the first truck is waiting for an opportunity to overtake the second truck. So I don't think the public at large has learned. We haven't learned enough as a society yet. And it's nice to wave the flag of victimhood when things go horribly wrong. And I don't, for a second think that we don't have the right to be upset by these incidents. But then some responsibility has to be pushed back into the hands of the public and the way in which they act, specifically on the roads and more importantly around incidents of this kind.
Now, this incident, at least for me, it was the first time I was hearing of it, especially the magnitude of the number of people who passed away. But, you know, how do we avoid it from happening again?
There's three components to avoiding it. The first component is there's never enough training or awareness. One of the components of avoiding these risks is what are called risk analyses or route risk assessments. There's still a trend in South Africa for people to think that a document outlining the route that the driver must drive is adequate as a risk mitigation tool. I myself provide so-called videographic route risk assessment services where I physically go and drive and film routes to guide the transporters that engage me. The second component is the training for the driver to have a risk, let's call it a risk-averse attitude as an individual. Knowing what to do when things go wrong is one thing, but being aware of when they could go wrong and having a forward predictive mindset is an extremely important component that's very difficult to impart when there are prevailing cultures that don't typically align with that. And the third thing, I believe, which I don't know who's going to take the responsibility for this, perhaps the Road Traffic Management Corporation, perhaps the Department of Transport, is the education of the public and the way in which the public sees these events. And unless you can develop, let's call it for lack of a better term, a fine balance between these three components, we are going to learn by mistake, and we are going to only be able to do what we call crisis management. We wait for an incident of this kind, we throw up our hands, we shake our heads, we play the blame game, we try to find out who must be responsible, and a year later, a month later, or a couple of years later, like we've seen with a rash of fires in buildings in Johannesburg, for instance, we're just repeating the exercise. And I think that's the problem in South Africa. It's so easy for us not to take personal accountability because it's always somebody else's fault or their guilt, right?
So what do you do in an instance where you find or you driving past somewhere and you see that a truck is stuck under a bridge and you smell chemicals, etc.? Do you call the police, or is there a specific number where at least the response would be faster?
Well, I can tell you, sadly, I just had an incident. In fact, there were some threats of firearms and I know what all just over this last weekend. I attempted to call the police at the 10111 number. I was listening to a message telling me that calls are recorded for safety or for quality purposes. Eventually, the recording suggested that if it's an emergency, although 10111 is an emergency number, I can always phone the local police station, which I tried. And of course, they simply didn't answer their phone. A better option would probably be to phone either 112, which is or to find out exactly what the emergency number is on your cell phone service provider. Something like 112, 084911, or perhaps 10117, I think it's 10117, which is the fire department. But the most important advice I can give is if the situation looks, smells, or seems dangerous, even if you don't understand a lot, even if it has great entertainment value, move away as far as you can. In this instance, we know that people as much as almost 100 meters away were seriously burned and multiple people died. So people tend to forget about their personal risk when their entertainment value is high, and they can almost imagine the extent to which their little bit of footage from their cell phone is potentially going to be received in the greater scheme of what we call the social media animal. And I think if we can move people away from that, let's call it addiction, that's what I think it is. People are so addicted to the entertainment value that they completely disregard their own safety. But you know what? It's a complex problem involving so many layers, from social media through to cultural issues. I'm talking about social cultures, and then right through to the issue of actual real-world risk and identification of that risk, of course.
Well, Stan, thank you so much for your time and for speaking to us. I mean, it's almost a year since then, and it feels like it just happened yesterday. I'm sure for those families, it feels even worse. Forensic specialist Stan Bezuidenhout.